Alright guys, today we have what should be a relatively straightforward project. We're going to be swapping in this remanufactured cam and rockers from Common Motor into my 1973 CB350G. You may have seen the video I did about that one. That's this green one here. This is actually the second time I'm doing this because about a year ago I purchased this similar setup, remanufactured cam and rocker set, and swapped it in, and everything was running fine. Actually, the bike ran better than it ever had, but I was noticing a persistent oil leak from behind the points advancer. At first I thought, well, maybe when I was installing everything I nicked the seal, so I replaced the seal twice. That didn't fix the issue, and it was a real slow leak, and just by chance the engine, one of the times I was cleaning up, was rotated in such a way that I noticed there was a couple little pits, and I'll show you them in a minute, just where the lip of the seal should have been sealing around this part of the shaft, and as that spun it was letting just a little bit of oil through there, and it was just kind of pooling up in the points housing. So this was well out of any kind of warranty period. I'm not even sure if Common Motor offers a warranty on this stuff, but I figured I'd give them a call and see what they could do, and to my surprise they sent me all of this as kind of a warranty replacement. So I didn't pay anything for this. They sent me this stuff, they sent me the gaskets and seals, and I just need to send them back the set that they had originally sent me. So hats off to Common Motor. It's rare these days that a company will stand behind anything, let alone a year later. So big thank you to them. If you need any parts, check them out. I bought a handful of stuff from them in the past, always been happy, but this is far and away some of the best customer service I've ever gotten from a company. I'm going to kind of take you along for the ride. I'm going to try to do this, and I'm going to find out very shortly if it's possible, since we're just swapping out the camshaft and the rockers and not actually getting into the head itself, other than pulling the head cover off. I'm going to see if I can do this with the engine and the bike. I know on the 360 you can do that. I'm not sure if there's enough clearance on the 350, so we're going to find out in a minute here. But first I got to get the tank and seat off and some of this other stuff out of the way, and then we'll dig into it. It took a few minutes to pull some of the other stuff off here. I'm still not convinced that I can't get that cover off without pulling the entire engine. So I got everything I could out of the way, exhaust, footrests, pulled off everything under here just to give myself as much working room, because either way, if I'm going to pull the engine, I need it out of the way anyways. So, and then to give myself as much room as possible, I've removed the 2 front engine mounting bolts and the upper rear mounting bolt, and I'm hoping I've already I put a jack underneath while I was doing that, and then I've lowered it down and gave me about another maybe 1/4 inch. So I'm hoping that's going to be just enough. If you're doing this, remember to loosen these, because it's going to want to pull everything forward, and if these are old, you're going to wind up splitting these little rubber boots here. So well, that answers that question. With a little bit of fiddling, you can get that cover off without pulling the engine. So I'm going to pull the alternator cover off so I can rotate the engine to position, and then I'm going to start pulling off the cam covers there, and we'll go from there. I want to stop and show you how I wound up having to kind of rig this thing up so I could get enough leverage and keep the cam from spinning as I was trying to loosen up this first bolt here. So I'm using a 1/4 inch drive socket extension and handle to just to be able to fit in between there. I've already got it on the bolt, because once you can only get enough clearance to get the socket in there when the cam's in a certain position. So on the other side, I took a long screwdriver, passed it through here, and then through the opening between the cam sprocket and the cam itself. And the reason I had to do this is for whatever reason, I can't remember if I used Loctite on this or not, but either way I couldn't get enough leverage just by kind of jamming a block of wood in there. So the Honda manual shows them just using like a normal wrench and coming in at an angle. I've never been able to get that to work. You just can't get enough of the bolt head into any kind of socket that I have. And I've tried to use those wobble extensions, and I just can't seem to get enough leverage that way. So if you do it this way, be real careful that this screwdriver isn't touching any of the cam lobes. But if you position it just right, that's going to kind of rotate a little bit, and then the screwdriver is going to kind of lock things in place. I was able to get it loosened up that way. Alright, now that we've got this on the bench here, let's take a look at what was causing the problem in the first place. Let me get down in here. I'm gonna focus. So that little dark spot right at my fingertip is what's causing all the problems, and there's a handful of those. Let me try to shift so the light shows it better. There, you can see that. So that little pit there is right where the outer lip of the oil seal sits, and that's where a little bit at a time that oil was seeping out into the points housing. So I'm a little concerned when I see similar pits on the replacement one here, but I think these, from what I can tell, are a little bit further inboard, and hopefully we don't wind up with a similar problem, because this is kind of a pain in the ass to do this. Not to mention the frustration of just, I mean, granted the cam I sent them originally wasn't in the greatest shape, but the bike ran great and didn't leak oil. So I've kind of traded a possible problem for, so far, a definite problem. So you can't have your points housing filling up with oil. So the other interesting thing, and now I don't have a lot of miles on this because of the oil problem, but you can see where this, I don't know what makes it dark like this when they resurface these, but you can see where the rocker was riding, just barely contacting this outer side of this lobe. Similar over here, making a little bit more contact. Let's rotate this over. And then this one here, it seems to only be making contact on one edge, and I don't know if that's normal, if these things kind of have to kind of wear into each other. But again, just kind of interesting to note, I guess. And then, so here's the left intake, and you can tell where it's only making contact in that little area. So hopefully over time these are going to wear into each other and you're going to get more contact. Seems like if they only needed to make that contact, these pads would be a lot narrower. So I'm assuming this isn't how it should be long term. This one a little bit more, but again, less than half. So maybe with some miles these kind of wear into each other. I don't know. So I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup, make sure I have the other gaskets that I'm going to need to wrap this job up, and we'll see if we can get it back together this afternoon. Okay, so I've got everything kind of roughly in place. I've gone ahead and put the break-in lube stuff that Common Motor provided with this kit on the cam lobes and the ends of the valves here, and then I'll do the same for the rockers themselves when I go to install them. So the next step is to basically get everything lined up correctly. So that's going to mean getting the crankshaft to the LT position. So line up the LT mark on the rotor with the mark on the stator. And there's an L and a horizontal line, or a line on the cam sprocket that needs to be horizontal. And then this little alignment pin for the advancer, everything has to be facing up. So that's going to take a little bit of fiddling, and then once that's in place, I can get the first of the two cam sprocket bolts in there. Okay, I've got everything lined up here. So I've got the LT mark lining up with the mark on the stator. I very gently pushed a tiny screwdriver in there to keep it from rolling past top dead center. And then I've got my, let me see if I can get it in the right lighting here. You can see that horizontal line, the reflection from the overhead lights. And in the middle, that's the L. So you want that line parallel with the surface of the head here. So got that lined up, and the alignment pin for the advancer is facing up. So this is the position you want everything to be in before you start installing your rockers and the end caps. When you're reinstalling this, make sure there's two different bolts, and in this position the one that's fully threaded is in the upper left, and the one that's only partially threaded, it's called a dowel bolt, that one's going to be in the bottom right. So they do have specific spots they're supposed to go in. If you're not quite sure what I'm talking about, refer to the manual, the shop manual, not the little owner's manual. It's not going to cover that. But what I'm going to do here is, even though I've got everything aligned, I'm going to kind of skip a few teeth in one direction, and I'm going to show you how to kind of wiggle this into position, because to get to this point things are not going to be aligned. It's real easy for the cam chain because the tensioner is not installed, your cam bearings are not installed, they're part of the end caps here. So just kind of wiggling this thing back and forth, you can get yourself off a tooth or two or a bunch, but it's pretty easy to kind of wiggle things back into place. So I'm gonna have to grab a light or something so you can see what I'm doing. Let me get things positioned. Now the key here is you don't want your crankshaft spinning. So that's why, again, I've taken a teeny screwdriver, I've just so slightly pushed it in place, and that's keeping my LT mark where I need it. So once that's stabilized, we can kind of walk things into place with the camshaft and the sprocket. And again, I'm doing this after the sprocket is bolted to the camshaft, because if everything's moving, then you don't really know what you're lining up. So get your sprocket installed, get things as close as you can, but then I'll show you how to kind of fine-tune this. Alright, so let's say you've got everything pretty much lined up, you've got your cam sprocket installed, and in the process you're off by a few teeth. So I can get in here and show you there. I get the light just right. So that, I don't know if it's gonna show, but so that horizontal line, or the line that should be horizontal, is actually kind of sloping this way. And I've intentionally done that just to show you what I'm doing here. And I'm about 3 teeth off. So I'm gonna put this in the tripod and then kind of watch how I'm kind of dropping everything just a little bit and kind of jiggling it. And you can feel as you're kind of moving across the teeth on the crankshaft. So hopefully this picked up what I was doing there, but basically I'm kind of dropping, I'm holding it from both ends, I'm kind of lowering it down and just kind of wiggling it back and forth, and that's giving enough slack down in the bottom end, because the sprocket on the crankshaft is pretty small. So it's allowing the chain to kind of wiggle back and forth, and I'm pulling up ever so slightly to try to get it to engage, and what I'm looking for is to just kind of walk it again until the L with the line is parallel with the surface of the head here. So, and then just kind of pull it up ever so slightly. Once it's engaged, every once in a while it'll feel like it's engaged, but it's not quite. So then you just kind of rock or kind of turn this back and forth just so that the chain sits properly on the teeth, and you can tell once it's in place. And then again, the key to all of this is making sure that your crankshaft is not rotating, because you want this to be your static point that you're kind of adjusting around. So now that we've got everything in place, I can get the rockers and shafts back in. I've got some new O-rings, and then I'll get the covers back on. Before I install these, I went ahead and cleaned everything off. I applied this break-in lube stuff to the rockers, and I'm using this Royal Purple assembly lube on the rocker shafts themselves. Now, in order to get things kind of positioned where you can get the end caps on, or the bearings, or whatever those pieces are actually called, you need to rotate the whole assembly so that all of the cam lobes are facing away from all four rockers at the same time. So I've got that there, and it's roughly halfway between left top dead center and right top dead center. So, and you can kind of feel it. So what you want to do is you're going to kind of lift up on your, because you don't want to rotate this and have it start skipping teeth down below. So you want to kind of hold the whole camshaft assembly up by the sprocket, and then with a 14mm wrench rotate the crankshaft until things are in position. So keeping as much tension on that as you can, just to try to ensure that you're not missing teeth. And then once you've got it in that position, you've got your rockers in place. What I like to do is just, I guess, kind of dry fit the end caps, and so without the gaskets on, and just kind of loosely maybe put 2 screws in each side, maybe, so they're not shifting around. And then I like to rotate everything through and make sure 2 things: 1, we're not binding, and 2, that when we hit LT on the rotor, we've still got things aligned up top. So just to ensure we haven't skipped any teeth in this rotating process, then what you can do is rotate it back to the position where all the cams are facing down, and then one at a time take the end covers off, put the gasket on, screw it into place all the way, and then do the same with the other one. That way things are kind of staying in line. Okay, so I've got each of these end caps in place. You can see there's a little bit of a gap. I didn't tighten it up. There's no gasket on there. I did put 2 screws in each one just to kind of hold it in place, and then I rotated everything through a couple of times, and no binding, which is good. And we've got our LT mark lined up here, and I don't know if you can see it here. We've got our horizontal line with our L mark there. Our little pin is pointing up, so I'm happy with this. I think we're got everything lined up, so I'm going to rotate it back to the position where all the cam lobes are facing away from the rockers, and then one side at a time I'm going to pull it back off, put the gasket on. I'll use some assembly lube and screw them in place, hopefully for the last time for quite a while. Before you reinstall your cam chain tensioner, this is a pretty good opportunity to pull it apart, make sure nothing's binding. So what I've done is I loosened this up, I pulled the plunger out, made sure it was moving freely, put some assembly lube in there, and then I've gone ahead and pushed the plunger all the way in and just tightened this bolt here. So you don't just want to put it back on with whatever tension you had it set at before. I also like, just for peace of mind, I like to hear that snap as this thing snapping in place, taking up the cam chain tension. If it's already in place, it's not going to have as much distance to move. You may or may not hear it. That's just personal preference. So this, I know this is going to move probably a good 1/4 inch based on where it was positioned the last time. So now, I'm sure there's some people out there that are going to disagree with me on this, but I know each of the manuals specifies a certain position to have your crank in before you adjust the cam chain tensioner, but all you really need is a position where you've got, I guess, counterclockwise tension on the camshaft so that there's no backlash in the cam chain. So you want the front of the cam chain to be tight so that all the slack is in the back, and then when you release that tension adjuster, that's gonna kind of slide forward and take out any of that backlash or slop in the back side of the chain there. So all right, so we're at the point where we need to set the valve clearance. It's a pretty straightforward job. Since I've just reinstalled all this stuff, the first thing to check is to make sure there's a little dash on the end of each of the rocker arm shafts that's perpendicular to the actual slot where you put the screwdriver to adjust it. That needs to face out. So the dash on the intake side should face rearward, and the dash on the exhaust side should face forward. Check that first. To do the left, just rotate the engine via the bolt on the crankshaft to the LT mark when it's on the compression stroke. So it's easier for me to check this because the cover's off here, but basically it's the position where both of these rockers are loose. If they're not both loose, rotate it 360 degrees and then you should be in the right position. So for the intake, we're looking for 0.05 millimeters, and the exhaust we want 0.1 millimeters. So I've just got one of these little feeler gauges here. So I've got the 0.05 end in place, and then with a flathead screwdriver, you're just going to turn your rocker shaft until you feel a slight drag. As soon as you do, do your best to hold it in place and then tighten this nut, recheck, and as long as everything's good, that's all there is to it. Same process for the right hand side. Just rotate the engine 180 degrees to the T mark on the rotor, and same procedure, and that's really all there is to it. I'm going to go ahead and get this cover installed, torque those head nuts down, and then get the engine raised back up and bolted into place. Alright guys, what do you say we fire this thing up and see if we can check this project off our to-do list. I've gone ahead and hooked it up on the auxiliary bottle here just in case something's wrong and I have to start pulling stuff back apart. I don't want to have to screw around with the drain in the tank and all that mess again. So run it on this for a little bit and make sure there's no obvious problems, and then I'll reinstall the tank and seat and side covers, and then hopefully take it for a little ride. We've got quite a bit of valve noise, but I'm not sure if that's actually a problem or not. I'm going to need to run it a little bit more, get it warmed up, and see if that quiets down. I hope you guys enjoyed this, maybe learned something. I appreciate you watching if you made it this far, and I'll see you in the next video.